call the meeting of the Finance and Audit Committee of College Renewed Order. The first thing we need is a motion, approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second. Aye, that's approved. Public comment period. No, no public comment. Okay, consent agenda. Minute to review minutes from a number of months ago. Motion to approve the minutes. Second, there is a minor typo on the first line of the set of 6A. It's bond buyer, you know why? On that. Motion to approve, second, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're all set on that front. New business, Mr. Carl.
I'm going to take a second for the finance staff to introduce themselves. Yes, introduce yourself.
Talking about finance staff. Let's be here today.
I'm Shawnette Hurley, the senior accountant.
Barbara Reeve, I'm the AP technician.
Pascal Kai, staff accountant.
Thank you.
How about our IT department?
Parks, IT.
So, welcome, appreciate the work that you do and supporting us in the organization.
Just a housekeeping item, we did put Alex News sweatshirts on everybody's desk. Hopefully, if you need a different size, just let us know. We tried to guess. They do run a bit large, so hopefully those all work. I don't know if you saw the Manny Theodore blog post from last night today, but he is rocking his Alex Renew sweatshirt at the end of his blog post. Thanking the board and staff for the time he spent with us during the board retreat. So I will turn it over to Ms. Fian to walk through a presentation on our FY26 budget. And also we're in a rate setting year, so we have a rate recommendation over FY26 and FY27.
Chair, everyone, and members of the board. We are just getting started on. So I think first I'll start with we appreciate the Finance and Audit Committee helping in the development of tonight's presentation. I think that we are appreciative of where we are and look forward to continuing to have discussions about where the budget can go. So this is an update from the presentation that was shown to the last week and addresses the comments today on slides. So the first slide is a slide that was initially presented to the board in November at the last Finance and Audit Committee meeting when we presented a review of our fiscal year 2026 budget. So it highlights on each component of our budget from the operating, debt service, and capital side, what we anticipate to see from expenses and revenues. So this is further progressed as to what is actually in the fiscal year 2026 budget and highlights major components. So starting with operating, the fiscal year 2026 budget includes the addition of an asset manager, technical trainer, and then 5 maintenance apprentices that are really being brought in at this point to account for anticipated retirements from the maintenance program. The asset manager and technical trainer are really helping us with ongoing initiatives as we really focus on development of our staff and then asset management. We also anticipate a total salary increase to account for a merit increase and performance awards from the operating standpoint in expenses. On debt service, we are anticipating about $20 million in terms of debt service. This is actually a decrease from last year, and that's due to the retirement and decrease in debt service payments for loans from 2004 and 2006. So it's a temporary decrease as we start to ramp up on debt service associated with Riverview and Phase Forward. On the capital side for expenses, still continued major investment in Riverview this year as we focus in on commissioning for the project. And then we're starting to see an increase in capital expenses for the Phase Forward projects. So $100 million anticipated for Riverview and about $50 million of capital investments for the Phase Forward projects this year. From the revenue standpoint, to assist in supporting Riverview, we are anticipating a rate increase. What is proposed to the board is a 5% for fiscal year 2026. And that's really to support Riverview as we continue to pay down that debt service in the long term. On debt service, adding in from the revenue standpoint, we anticipate about $500,000 of interest income associated with debt service. And then on the capital side, we anticipate approximately $60 million of Fairfax capital contributions for overall our capital and IR&R program, and about $1 million of projected interest income for capital. This is an update of an infographic that was developed last year. It looks a little more jazzy. Last year we had only the tunnel boring machine partway through the tunnel. As Hazel has now completed her journey, the tunnel is fully developed. And really the focus of the infographic is to present our budget more in a way that's digestible to the public. So overall, the glimpse at the big picture is a budget of $258.3 million. And that's broken down into operating costs here, and then capital projects throughout here. So Phase Forward with biosolids, nutrient treatment, headworks, and then the remainder of approximately $38.5 million for the remainder of capital projects. We additionally have payments to Arlington associated with operating costs and capital costs that are shown here on the left side of the infographic. IR&R projects associated with our collection system, and then Riverview down here. And then finally, just captured the $20.2 million for debt service. This slide presents an overview of the budget for the year. So again, it's $258.3 million, and that breaks down from an expense and revenue standpoint, starting with $197.2 million for capital outlay, debt service, which we hit on, $20.2 million, and then operating expenses and transfer to reserves of $48.9 million. We'll get more into each of these pieces as we move on in the presentation. On the revenue side, this breaks down to $120 million of general capital proceeds, $59.4 million, so approximately $6 million for Fairfax capital contributions, and then the remainder is operating revenues from customer rates of $78.1 million. So looking a little bit more at the revenue standpoint, we're focusing on revenues. So again, operating revenues, the $63.4 million is associated with an increase, the rate increases of 5% to support ongoing investments in Riverview. Fairfax County contributions are broken down between operating charge and capital contributions. As our operating expenses are going up, so is Fairfax County's contributions to their operating charge associated with those increases. And as we start to invest more money in the plant, specifically around phase forward, but other capital improvements. Fairfax County's capital contributions are going up by approximately 45%. Then finally, general capital proceeds, which are largely comes from loans that support Riverview and phase forward, are increasing for approximately on par with last year's general capital. This was a follow-up to a conversation that we had last week. I wanted to present some information around our debt service. So this is our current debt service, assuming that we have continued use of WIFIA. And so what this breaks down to is, as of today, we potentially tomorrow, we didn't quite get there today, but we've requisitioned approximately $109 million from WIFIA. And so approximately when you look at the remainder of what we need, we anticipate requisitioning from WIFIA, there's about 136 million that remains. So this is, if we continue to requisition on WIFIA, this is what we anticipate our debt service to look like.
Would be correct to assume we don't expect any more glitches at the EPA level on with you as far as reimbursing it.
You know, I think that the next slide is to just say if we hope we do not anticipate any
We
more
don't.
glitches.
Have any that we're experiencing right now, but
Correct, yeah.
tomorrow's another day.
Yes,
Would that be affected by a government shutdown?
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, so there you go.
The government shutdown, I think what would happen, you know, is a likely scenario is that we could have another government shutdown, which then would require us, instead of drawing on WIFIA, would be to draw on our line of credit until the government reopens and we can draw back down on WIFIA and use that to pay off the line of credit.
Is our line of credit now doubled? That's all signed, sealed, and ready to use.
Yes.
Good.
Mr. Jenks, you asked a question when we spoke last, if we had to go out today to the public bond market with that remaining 136 million, what would be the impact? And so this just shows if this purple kind of, this is what we'd owe with you regardless because of what we've requisitioned to date. So that 136 million is this additional purple bar. That's assuming we go out to the public bond market today. And it's a current interest rate of 4.2. This over the time frame that we're looking at would be an increase of approximately $50 million.
So this chart represents a worst case. So the prior chart is without the additional debt.
Assuming we have continued use of WIFIA through the end of the project.
Previous slide is best case as we initially planned the job. This would be worst case, you know, back a month ago and wondering if we're going to be able to draw.
It's the issuance of the same amount of debt, just the interest. It's the only difference between these two charts.
I think our initial calculation, we were quoted in Politico was like 80 million. That was the back of the envelope. This, you know, we dug into the details for tonight's discussion. Shows it's significant amount of debt service for the organization and our ratepayer.
So moving forward with the proposed rate recommendation for this year and for fiscal year 2026. What's proposed is a 5% this year and a 5.7% next year. And so this slide just shows the rate increases that have largely been driven by Riverview over several years. These rate increases are again largely driven by Riverview. We anticipate the next couple of years still increasing rates associated with Riverview as we continue to focus on paying down debt. That trend will drop off in the next 2 years, or in the next rate recommendation. recommendation year. And there was a question just on what were the rate adjustments projected during this year 2024 budget process. And so it largely lines up for 26 and 27. There's a slight difference in 28, 29. Added this slide to show where we are with river renew only rate increases. So this isn't overall rate increases. This is just when you take out river renew and how we've been increasing rates to account for the capital needs associated with that project. This is a chart that shows in April 2020 or April 2018, there was a projection of approximately $20 to $40 increase over the time frame of river renew to account for river renew's total cost to Alex Renew. And this just shows where we, since starting this process of raising rates for renew, where we fall within that projection. So largely on the lower end of that projection since we've implemented these increases.
So if I read this right, the prior projection, the very early projection was $40 a month for River Renew, and this is about 17. So it's less than half.
Yeah, so it was between
I guess, Caitlin, if you remember, there was a budget range that we put out there for Riverview. This is April 2018 was in this room, long-term control plan public presentation. And we presented this slide, and at the time we were carrying a range of costs. It was a high end and a engineer's estimate. We didn't carry the low end costs. So that lower part, the 20 was the low estimate of River Renew, and then the 40 was the high estimate of River Renew. I think River Renew came in higher than anticipated with the tunnel project when it was bid, but the funding, the way we funded through WIFIA and the Virginia Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund helped drive down overall rate increases, given the low interest rate on both of those loans. So even though we came in high, the funding story
The
really
grants
helped.
and the rates.
Thank you, COVID, for something.
Took away from it. Yeah,
Right.
Good.
This slide just demonstrates from the standpoint of the 2 fiscal year proposed rate increases, approximately how much of it is Riverview. It's around 63, 64% is associated with Riverview. And the remainder is for other capital investments and operating expenses. Into this a little bit. I think coming out of the board retreat, there was a lot of great discussion about where we could go with our rate structure. And there was, I think we're starting to look at how do we start evaluating impacts to our customers. When we presented the different rate structures at the board retreat, there was a small sample size of customers that were presented. And right now we're moving forward with analysis to look at getting to a bigger sample size of customers to really understand and dig into customer rate impacts as we evaluate different rate structures. This slide really hits on that smaller subset of customers and looking at an equivalent rate. If we converted our existing rates to an ERU rate structure, what would we? And the biggest takeaway, other than adding in the cost per gallon line, is that there's kind of a mixture of increases and decreases with the sample size that we currently have for converting to ERUs. For the purpose of this specific rate adjustment, we looked at if we only increased the variable rate for this rate increase, how much would really, what would be the difference between increasing our rates the way that we typically do, which is increasing the rates across all of our charges. So that's what this is shown here. And it results in an increase of about 2.3 million for variable rate revenues and 0.7 million for base charge revenues. there was a question asked about if we only increased variable rate charges, what would be the difference? And so that 0.7 ends up in the variable rate or variable charge revenues. I think that we looked at this from the standpoint of where we are in our mission and are recommending to the board that looking at an ERU rate structure, which we think generally is where we want to, or is interested in going, or at least evaluating at this point, it results in a mix of increases and decreases, but we've only analyzed bill impacts for a small subset of customers. And so the variable rate only rate adjustments would help minimize impacts to customers with base charge reductions if we converted to an ERU rate structure. That based on the analysis that we're about to do, that it'd be helpful to continue in understanding the full impacts to our customers before moving forward with a different rate structure or different approach this year. And so the recommendation is to really look at the magnitude of customer bill impacts and to best determine a phase and approach for rate structures as we move forward with the discussion with the board. And something like that, depending on how significant the bill impacts are to rate or to customers, there might be a difference of a 3-year to 4-year to 5-year phase in plan as we look at changing those or that rate structure. And that part of that discussion does factor in any future rate adjustments. So as we increase rates, we might not have to reduce the base charge as much because we're already increasing rates. Do you have anything to add on that one?
I guess we talked about this at length during our prep meeting. The challenge is it's just probably for right now this year is probably too early to look at phasing in some sort of a alternative rate structure. I guess one, we don't have our arms around what that rate structure is going to be yet. And two, we'd like to understand who's really impacted. If it was just a residential only class, yes, it's very easy to look at residential only and go ahead and phase in a variable only rate because we know it's going to decrease. Their base charge is going to remain consistent. When we think about moving forward and phasing in a whole new rate structure like the ERU that we talked about at the board retreat, we can tailor the phase-in plan not just for overall all of our customers, but customer classes. We can have a different phase-in plan for each customer type. So maybe a restaurant would have a high water restaurant user would have a different phase-in plan than a commercial customer or a residential customer. That getting that 350 sample of our customers is going to give us a better idea how we'd want to phase this in. And that's sort of what we're recommending, at least for this year, to do. And next year we might be in a better place to, once we decide what we're doing with rates, start phasing in that new potentially ERU rate structure by customer class or customer type.
Questions on this important issue? Okay, proceed.
Gonna take it home, right?
Thank you. Again, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Excited to be here again to tag along and add to what Ms. Feehan has already shared. So as Ms. Feehan talked about earlier, looking at the expenses for FY26 budget, we have 3 main categories of expenses, as you all know. We have the capital outlay, which accounts for roughly about 76% of total expenses. Debt service, which accounts for roughly about 8%. And the operating expense and transfer to reserve that accounts for roughly about 16% of total expenses. Now, looking at the FY26 budget estimate compared to FY25, you can see the capital outlay went up 22 million or approximately 13%, primarily due to investment to complete and commission River Renew and to design and begin the construction of the Phase Forward project we've been talking about over the past few months. Again, Ms. Feehan mentioned this earlier, debt service dropped down a little bit from prior year's budget, primarily due to some older debt that we have that are going away as we acquire new ones going forward. Operating expenses and transfer to reserve, and we'll talk more about this on the next slide, went up 5.6 million and or 16%, primarily due to our personnel adjustment, higher cost of consumables, addition of preventative maintenance activities for equipment, and reserve to account for unforeseen events and emergencies. Questions so far before? And we'll talk more about operating expenses. All right. So this is our FY26 operating expenses as well as the transfer to reserve. As I mentioned on the previous slide, total cost is going up about 5.6 million or about 16%. With excluding just the transfer to reserve, just for a sec, personnel accounts for roughly about 47% of the total operating expenses. And as Ms. Pian mentioned, that is primarily driven with the addition of 7 FTEs that we added. Five of those 7 FTEs are to support the maintenance apprenticeship program. The other 2 FTEs.
Wait, maybe a second on that. Just so I know some of the other board members heard this, but for Mr. Beal and Ms. Hammer, 5-6 years ago, we saw retirement of our operations crew. Our average tenure of experience went from something like 15 to 17 years down to 5 to 7 almost overnight. We had a large retirement of all of our senior operators, and we didn't have an apprentice class built up to replace them. And I think what we learned from that is while we still have the senior maintenance technicians here on site, experience levels between 30 and 41 years, they can help train a new group of electricians and mechanics. They can learn the plant from those existing maintenance techs. And we're not left with a gap when we have this retirement here in the near, 2 to 5 years from now, because we'll start losing those more senior technicians over the next, I would say 2 to 5, or this year to year 5, most likely. So what you'll see is an arbitrary increase in our FTEs. They're going from 126 full-time equivalents from 126 to 133. They'll likely drop back down again as we start to see some of these retirements occur over the next several years. But we wanted to get that apprentice class in. We felt it was needed. We needed to get that done this year, so we're in the same boat as we were with operations.
Question: when you hire and somebody as an apprentice, are they a lower pay than?
Correct.
So that would then tend to help you hire folks who would have a longer, well, we can't discriminate on age. We would tend, because of that, to get people who are more at the early part of their career, which would mean we'd have a chance of having them be with us for a longer period of time.
Right. Yeah, a lot of their apprentices do come in, they either come in, directly at a high school, or they come in after some other similar field work, or they're recommended by our staff. Most recently, we talked about this at a big board meeting, but a lot of the hires we've made have come through word of mouth recommendations from our staff in the last, I'd say, year. So, and yeah, they're usually apprentices will come in anywhere with no experience to 5 years experience. And they start as what we call a service worker, which is, the entry level maintenance.
Do we plan any, or do we typically have any interactions at the city high school with tech classes and folks who are nearing graduation and thinking about, if it's not college, then what else might be out there?
We have with Alexandria High School, and we're also participating in a career fair in 2 weeks that is focused on, it's the local association, CCNA. So we're working with them to attend their career fair and try and get some of their staff to, or some of their some of their network to also understand what we do and start applying for jobs here. I think there's an untapped resource here, and we can do a lot more with our hiring locally in Alexandria.
I think the Alexandria Fire Department has been trying to do some of those same things, so they get people to think, gee, I could be a firefighter here rather than somewhere else, or not even think about that as a profession.
So the event on the 21st will be represented by fire department, police, us for the first time. Trying to, again, recruit some of these students.
What is that?
So we Google, do you remember what it is? Concerned Citizens Network of Alexandria?
I think it's Concerned Citizen Network. Yeah,
Is that it?
at least is the core of the title.
But yeah, we, you'll see in the monthly report next month, we had one of their board members come in and present to our staff last month and talk about local volunteer efforts and how we can get more involved through hiring. Citizen, yeah, that's right.
Hmm.
It was a contact we made through Mr. MacArthur Myers that we're working on with signage in African American. We didn't realize that, it was that large until we sat down on our page.
Looking at the next category of the operating expenses are the utility. Utility is going up in FY26 compared to FY25 by approximately 400,000 or 10.3%, primarily due to just higher usage than initially originally estimated. The FY26 estimated numbers are actually in line with the FY24 actual usage. Chemicals, we continue to see increase in chemicals are going up approximately 600,000 or 16.1%, primarily due to vendor cost increases from inflation and higher loading to the plant. Operations and maintenance category expenses are going up approximately 400,000 or 23.1%. And this is due to, as Mr. Carl alluded to earlier, Mr. Carl alluded to earlier about the maintenance apprenticeship program we have, not only the addition of the 5 staff, but just our general maintenance apprenticeship. We have a new or enhanced, I should say, training program in that category, as well as the addition of the 5th floor on this building where we have increased janitorial services as a result of expanding the 5th floor of this building, as well as preventative maintenance activities for our chillers, boilers, and other equipment to ensure reliability. Arlington sewage disposal. Mr. Jinks, I know you shared with us the last time we met, and actually our initial estimate was almost right on the money. We looked at the operating budget, and it reflected there was about a difference of about 20,000, but we adjusted our budget accordingly. So increase on that again was about less than 100,000. I think it was like about 56,000, but remains largely consistent with last year's budget. Sludge disposal up from last year's budget again, approximately about 100,000 or about 10.8%. And that is due to an increase from the amendment agreement that we have. The last category within the operating expense is the general admin and customer services, as well as other miscellaneous operating expenses. That is going up approximately 400,000 from FY24 budget estimate, or about 7%. And what's primarily driving that is the increase we are now seeing with our property insurance due to more asset that we now have, primarily resulting from the River Lagoon project, as well as our customer billing operating expenses. If you remember the past 2 years, the customer billing expenses has been more on the capital side as we implemented a new software, phasing away from the old system onto the new system. So now that that system is fully functional, you see that cost move away from the capital side now to the operating side. Okay. I think for the first time in Alex Renew, and Mr. Carr, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we do have a transfer to reserve just to set aside some funds for unforeseen events and emergency to the tune of 2.5 million. So overall, this gives a total operating expense and transfer to reserve of 40.9. That's a $5.6 million increase from FY25 estimate of 16%. Questions so far on the FY26 operating expense and transfer to reserve?
So the fact sludge disposal represents current status quo, which includes the existing contract amendment.
Yes, sir.
And if we have any other kind of emergencies, events, or other kind of costs, that's what the transfers for.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
If we were not to, I guess for the round numbers for the board, if we, we're projecting 1.9 million for next year for disposing of biosolids as we currently do, but if we were not able to dispose of biosolids, that number would jump up to 4.6 million. So we want to make sure we're being cognizant of that reality in the state and plan for it. Our solid system is not going to be done until 2031 with the pellet system drying. So we are starting to see permits being revoked in the state for expansion. So it should pick up the iceberg. Something we're dealing with over the next several years.
Rejected by DEQ or rejected by the localities.
The most recent one was in Westmoreland County, expansion of 1,900 acres. It was opposed by the Virginia Watermen, that's what they call themselves, and the Potomac Riverkeeper. And Synagro actually pulled the permit and they pulled it from the state.
So
They no longer wanted to expand in that area. And a lot of that has to do with outside state solids coming in from Maryland that have concentrations that can't be disposed of on farmland in the state.
Okay. Questions on this page?
That little nugget changed in a week. Last talk on the topic.
Looking at the FY26 major capital investment, as I mentioned earlier, the capital outlay accounts for 76% of the total expenses. And now looking at just the major capital investment, we've been talking a lot about the baseball project and River Renew. Between those two capital outlays, coincidentally, they also account for 76% of the total capital budget estimate that we do have. The phase forward projects on here are the Biosolids Diversification Project with a budget estimate of 25.2 million in FY26, and that is to finalize design and start construction of short-term upgrade. Also to continue the design of medium-term upgrades as well. Headworks Renewal has a budget of approximately 20.7 million in FY26, and that is to finalize design and start construction on the primary wear observation house, primary settling tanks, and sludge pumps. We have the nutrient reduction project for approximately 2.5 million estimated for FY26. That is to procure design builder, execute contract, and begin planning and design work. the River Renew Tunnel Project. You're very well familiar with this. That project alone by itself accounts for roughly 48% of the total capital outlay. That is in FY 26, do have a $96 million budget to complete pumping station, finalize construction at all 4 sites, and conduct operational demonstration. Mr. Carter, anything you wanted to add about?
Can't wait for us to get to that point.
All right. Another category in our capital outlay, Ms. Fian mentioned this earlier, is the improvement renewal and replacement program. Accounts for 12.7 million of the FY 26 capital outlay. And these are just capital projects all around the plant, as well as the EC building here, focusing on improvement and just repairs to equipment and processes. Questions so far on this major capital investment for FY 26?
Biosolid and Headworks, when is the NTP for construction?
Sorry?
When the notice proceed for construction?
Oh, it's a CMAR, so that happened last May. So what we'll do is we'll bring contract amendments to the board as we go through each phase. I think there's 6 packages total. 1 package was approved, I think, just before you began as a board member. Now for pre-purchase of some of the equipment needed to make the upgrades, and we'll be bringing another one of those types of packages to the board in July. But construction started on biosolids. They're going to start taking down the line tower in Building L the next several weeks.
So those are early packages
Early
that,
packages, and then we'll have the big package for the dryer at a later date. But right now, we need to shore up solids to make sure we're reliable for the next 3 years while we do construction.
Greg, can you go back? There, just a note about when last week was to add the prior year's fiscal year transcript projection. So what was anticipated for this fiscal year when we looked at last year? And you can see that River Renew, we had not really reallocated costs that had not been spent until we had the legislative change. And so now have moved costs that were, as we've seen, spending at a lower rate than anticipated. We're seeing a costs.
It might be helpful in wherever this shows up in the text to say the total project budget is not changed. It's just the change in timing of when it occurs. However, would be best to word that just so that anybody looking at it doesn't see we've gone from 2 million to 6 million. Rather, it's just a matter of the timing of which fiscal year that this is going to occur and when we could say it can occur. Because last year we really kind of knew where the timing was likely to be, but couldn't say it until General Assembly had acted.
It really shows you the delay, doesn't it?
So looking at the FY 26 consolidated budget from a flow of funds standpoint in alignment with what's in the master indenture of trust, as well as our financial policy. We see from an operating revenue, which is the depository when we receive our money, everything comes in from the operating revenue of 78.2 million. All right, that is about 6.6% higher than FY 25's budget, primarily because of the rate increase of the 5% that we have. The remaining delta has to do with the increase with the Fairfax operating expense charge because of our higher operating O&M cost. So out of that 78.2 million, 40.9 million will cover the operating expenses as well as the transfer to reserve that we've talked about in previous slide. The remaining 37.3 million will go over to cover our debt service and the remaining as a funding source for our capital project, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So again, out of that 37.3 million, approximately 20 million will go over to debt service just to cover our debt service expense for FY26. The remaining 17.4 carries over to our capital funding sources as one of the funding sources that we have there. And that accounts for roughly about 25% of the capital outlay funding source. So again, we do have a Fairfax capital contribution, a capital outlay funding source of 59.4 million. A big part of our funding sources for our capital outlay, again, are the debt proceeds. Ms. Bian mentioned this earlier, again, with the loans we're getting from the WIFIA, as well as, like I said, our bonds to cover the Phase Forward project. So that light there just pretty much shows the flow of funds from operating revenue, what it's being used for, and how they flow within the expense category. Questions so far on the flow of fund, or Mr. Carl, is there anything to add? So looking at the FY26 budget and fiscal year 2026 and 2027 rate adjustment schedule, back in November, we had a budget preview with the board. I mean, we had a budget preview just talking about what we anticipated in our plan of action, try to get in an attempt to receive any feedback or guidance from the board. Today, we're meeting with the Finance and Audit Committee to present the preliminary draft and rate recommendation. Next week, next Tuesday, we'll be presenting the same material again to the board.
Third time's a charm.
Third time's a charm.
We're slow learners.
We'll come back more stronger, make it more exciting, basically. All right. With the anticipation moving forward that on April 15th, the board will adopt the draft budget and rate recommendation for public hearing on Saturday, May 17, 2025, which at that point would present the draft budget and rate recommendations again to the public. Moving along there with the anticipation by June 17th, the board approves the budget, the FY26 budget and rate recommendation. Questions so far? Schedule.
Pretty consistent with the way we've handled things. Yeah, probably since time immemorial.
Can I jump in?
Sure.
This budget is, every year, the budget presentation gets better and better. It is without a doubt the clearest presentation of a public utilities budget that I've ever seen. It keeps getting better every year. Just a couple of ideas. Let's pretend for a moment that members of the public will actually come on May 17th. And to make this presentation even better, let me suggest just two small changes. I think in this wonderful infographic, there's a way you could color the various circles, the purple circles, which are capital, which are operations. Because the central theme of our budget is always for capital intense business. And that most of the purple circles you see are in fact capital projects, right? They are. And then I would add a final page that just summarizes I think the 3 or 4 or 5 points that really summarize this budget. And that is, we're in capital intense business. The rate increase is 5%. 60% of that increase is due to River Renew. And our projections for the impact of River Renew that we made back in 2018 were far below those projections for a whole variety of reasons. So I think that's sort of the takeaway. But this is just the clearest presentation of a public agency's budget I've ever seen. It's wonderful. Very well done by the whole team. Fantastic.
Just maybe read that, the capital intense, 5% increase. The other one?
60% of the increase is due to River Renew.
Yep, I got that.
The final one is the cost of River Renew is actually less than we projected way back in 2018.
Maybe you could take that last chart with that shows where we are versus the high and low and put some more text or arrows in it, basically making Mr. Hill's point. Just use that. It's got a lot of empty space that you could put text and arrows in and help you understand. Kind of here's what 26 is, and maybe a dotted line that runs on 26, and tells that the good story.
Yeah. The reason the purple circles are important is I'm sure the average person thinks that, oh, we're done with River Renew, can rest on our laurels, right? And in fact, we are undertaking capital improvements that are as big combined as River Renew. So we're not resting at all. And that's why the rates are probably going to continue to grow at a modest 3 to 5% rate for a long time.
You could even take that, make an equation out of that 258.3 bullet, and because it equals the 39 million in capital plus debt service plus capital. So you see at the top, getting to your point, here are the three elements. Capital is nearly 200 million of that.
I know we like purple, so yeah. Well done. Well, very, very well done.
That wraps up today's meeting. I will turn it back to Mr. Carl. Mr. Stanton. Additional thing that I have to add to it all. First of all, Mr. Jinks, going back to you, is there anything you, in addition to what you've already had, say or?
Is there any other questions at this point? We will have multiple opportunities to ask questions and opportunities to submit your written, wonky detailed question that you might have by going through the stick budget. So, yeah.
The budget's included in tab 3. I don't know if you want to walk through it, but it's largely structured the same way it was. Here, Mr. Jenks, or if you just want to have the board review it and get comments back to you to consolidate and send it back. We don't handle it.
Seeing that comments on the details, people's questions, just get them right to you, and you can copy us on when you have responses back or comments back. Copy the whole board. That's a probably quicker way than maybe an interim. If we ask the same question, that's good. If we don't, that's good too.
Replace it, showing that transfer.
Yeah, the version that we got sent, delivered, has been slightly modified in a couple of key areas. What's in it looks the same on the cover, but I've already written revised on mine, so I know which one. I don't get them mixed up. So the other one could be that we got it delivered for this meeting can be recycled.
Yeah, I noticed that also in your presentation, some of the numbers changed, so I understood. I just folded from the folder. Thank you.
Here's in here, we also have this draft of the rates, rules and regs, rates, rules and regulations. So that's also included in tab 4. And then we want to walk through the updates to the financial policy. We've been discussing these for a little while. Great. So you remember last board meeting, we talked about our days cash calculation. So what we wanted to do is go back to, and largely for this reason, based on comments that we received from S&P. You go to the next slide. Maybe let's just start where we started. So when we presented to S&P in 2004, we had a similar slide in our presentation to S&P and in our packet to go through a rating analysis with S&P. And what it showed, days cash starting in FY 26, going through FY 2033, it showed a drop in days cash from 600 to slightly below 400, well above what S&P requires for their minimum of 150 days. Minimum of 150 days, and then Alex New's financial policy, which we would like to update, is currently 120 days, but we'd like to update that to 270. So we do have buffer within our new policy limit, but what S&P was noting, and the quotes included here, for the rating level, liquidity reserves are normally weaker than the median S&P. And the median S&P was around 700, which is shown here by this yellow bar. So that's where we got the, for lack of a better word, ding on the rating. It was a result of this graph. And this graph also uses, oh, he's so the show. This graph also uses our current way of calculating days cash. So going back to our board discussion, our board report days cash is only looking at 2 buckets of unrestricted cash: operating and general. So when we look at that, those sources, out of all of our unrestricted sources, we end up with that graph, and that's what we showed to S&P. We did not show S&P what they're used to seeing, which is, go back to the first one, taking all of our unrestricted cash and investments, and then using that as our presentation of days cash. We were showing them our narrow budget definition of days cash, not what the rating agencies are used to seeing. So when we actually do it per the rating agency, same graph, same time period, using all of our cash, we are no longer considered weaker. We're right on par with the other median S&P.
Does add where we finished the end of last year, where we had additional cash that we did not anticipate. So this takes into account that additional cash as well.
So that's where that whole comment came from. I think the comment was, we met our policy of 120 days. We would meet 270, but we were weaker than the average. We were weaker than the average because we weren't using this playing the same game. So when we actually look at that with all of our cash, all of our unrestricted cash, it looks something like this. So what we're proposing in the financial policy is to have 2 bounds. If you want to go back, like, we want to update the current policy for unrestricted cash per board report, so our board report approach, and have that at 270 days. And then we want to add a new criteria around the unrestricted and be able to track that as well. for compliance with our strong bond rating.
I'd also add that it's not just S&P, it's all the
Yeah.
financial houses that buy municipal bonds for municipal bond funds. Their analysts are going to be looking, they don't drill down to understand, oh, there's really more cash there. They don't look at that level. They're looking at certain measures and comparing, do I buy this bond or that bond? How much cash they have? So they're looking to S&P and as much as they drill down in our financials at a broader definition of cash. So it's really in our interest to get on the same wavelength as S&P definition, because the municipal bond market, that's the wavelength they use to kind of consider, what's a good amount of cash to have to be a AAA.
The way it's called out, and when you look at the financial policy, if you look at page 2, it's where most of the work has been done on the financial policy. We call it operating in days cash on hand, leaving that at 120. And then when we look at our total days cash on hand to maintain a AAA credit rating, is where we're looking at upping that to 270. I do want to point out that 270 is still well below. Go to third slide. Still below, at 270, it's still well below what S&P is looking at in their comment, which is the median. We had to go back and look at the comment and read it like 6 times to make sure we understood it, but they were looking at the median, not our financial policy, not their minimum of 150. They weren't using this. It was this line.
Yeah, well, they're comparing us with other, they're using median of what they measure with other utilities. Because that's how you're in AAA, we're in a club, and in fact, highly rated utilities, and kind of general condition is, a high number of days of cash. So it'll make sense that we
Would like to add to it, and I believe Mr. Powell mentioned this, the 270 is a minimum target. It's a floor target, minimum target, which is comparable to S&P's 150 days.
You guys keep talking about S&P's comment. Was that comment closed? Did you show them?
No, so when we got they sent us a narrative after we got our AAA rating, and that note was included in their narrative to us. I forget what it was called.
It was basically the report that reaffirmed our credit rating and that we received in May. I don't know that they would have realized that we would focus on that, but I think that the next time, what this does for us is the next time we should be in a better place when we need to go back and get an updated credit rating if we continue looking like this, so that hopefully that wouldn't be a kind of a yellow flag that they bring up when they look at our credit again.
We're trying to get ahead of it so it doesn't happen again.
And I think we would have to go back out the next time we're going back out to the market. So,
That's right, because of the rating agents, you want to beat them to their questions by your presentation. So
that's the goal. I think, keep looking at what are the potential issues that would come up, and keep trying to have these conversations so that we are doing what we need to maintain that AAA, because it did prove very advantageous to us from the standpoint of the last time we went out. So we want to, as best we can, maintain that.
I would also add that S&P and other credit rating agency or investors do pull our last audited financial statement, which they will have seen this new updated numbers for their own analysis and they do stuff.
if they had taken the time to look that deep and given, very often that's why the rating agencies write that 6-page single-spaced report. So the rating analysts at, Fidelity or Vanguard or whatever, or not the rating analysts, the analysts who do the buy recommendations, don't have to all do, kind of do the drill down in details homework. They have S&P to do it for them.
If you read that paragraph that we pulled the quote from, they also note that we did drop off in days cash from the previous year. So you see the drop coming 26 to 27. So that was another note they made. They felt like we're getting close to our own threshold on the previous. If you go back one, we were getting closer to 20.
It's probably more important that any issuer like us who only has one rating, do everything we can to kind of make that single rating firm, in this case S&P, satisfied and have no questions that end up in what goes out to the public. We had 2 ratings or 3 ratings, then you'd be like, yeah, it's just one, but it's the only thing that's written about us that the municipal bond market has.
For the financial policy, we'd like to, if the Finance and Audit Committee is good with the edits and the approach, we'd like to bring this forward to
You had
board for
Yeah.
approval next.
I send it to them.
And Ms. Fian just noted that it will likely not appear in your agenda that you get in the next few hours. But we will have it.
It'll be in the green folder.
So all your comments are incorporated?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, mine were incorporated earlier, so we're all set. Well, the committee is happy. I don't know. If other board members who are here want to weigh in or have questions.
I think,
We are happy.
I think what we'll do on the agenda is add it under the Finance and Audit Committee report out at the board meeting, and we can just take motion on it at the board meeting. We don't have to do a lot with the agenda. It just needs to be included in the packet.
Sure. And in this case, you should probably need a motion of the committee recommending that the revised financial policy be approved by the board. Motion?
So move.
Second? Okay. That's adopted.
The super majority.
And that is any other further business.
Could we just spend one moment on rates, rules, and regs? Just thinking ahead to the table that appears on page 2. We have different base charges by meter size, right? Thinking ahead, we go to a ERU or volumetric kind of approach. How does this table change? Yeah, this would be very different, right?
Your base charge, you would just have a base charge based on ERU, and that ERU would be defined most likely by your resident class. I think we actually have it.
Yeah, we don't have to drill down on it now,
No,
but I
but
just wanted
that's,
to,
it'd be 3. Yeah, everybody would have the same, it'd be an ERU based on, yeah. So you still have current rate, you have proposed rate, there's only 3 numbers. There's the proposed rate, your base rate of ERU or ERU, and then your ERU charge per meter size. So it won't be a big, you wouldn't have meter size, it would be based on equivalent.
Okay.
So one number that gets applied to an equivalent.
ERU.
Yeah.
Okay. It is largely volumetric. Right? It's ERU is essentially measurable.
Much simpler table.
Yes, got it. Good. Thank you. Thank you.
Any further items or discussion? Staff? From the committee or our distinguished guests?
No question about it.
And motion to adjourn,
So move.
second, we're done. Thank you very much.
Green sweatshirts, if you, want, we also have pullover too, we can get you a pullover. Works.
No, go ahead. Okay. I need to check which one is the right one.
Oh, here,
Because I don't
Mark
want to
knows.
carry
Mark.
both of them. I want to read
The
the
one
right
that
one.
says,
I wanna-
if you go to page 3, go to the bar charts,
So like,
I want to
yeah,
read the
getting.
right one, not
And I- and- and you go
258
home and
or
look at-
250.